Turn your face back before I decide the other side looks lonely. Brick Mason stood over Malik Carter, a black man who had been assigned to Northgate less than 18 hours earlier, with one hand resting on the edge of the dayroom table. His smile never reached his eyes. Around him, conversations had fallen silent in stages, first at the nearest tables, then beside the television, and finally along the upper tier, where men leaned against the railings to watch. Malik slowly turned his head. A red mark was already forming across his left cheek. The slap had come without warning, open-handed, and hard enough to knock his identification card against his chest. Brick had chosen the moment carefully. Morning movement had just ended. Nearly every seat was occupied. Officer Floyd Anderson stood less than 20 feet away with his arms folded, watching as though the scene were part of the prison's daily schedule. Brick tilted his head, pretending to inspect his work. "That one was for fun," he said. "The next one means you owe me." Malik did not touch his cheek. He did not look toward Anderson for help. His attention settled briefly on Brick's feet, then moved to the larger man's shoulders and hands. Brick's left heel was raised. His weight rested too far forward. His right arm hung lower than the left. Malik noticed everything in less time than it took the room to draw a breath. Then he lowered his eyes. The men surrounding them interpreted the movement exactly as Brick intended. A few laughed. Others returned to their meals before they could be accused of staring. Jaylen Foster, a thin young inmate seated near the wall, looked down at his tray with such urgency that his plastic spoon slipped from his fingers. Brick leaned closer to Malik. "You came in quiet," he said. "That usually means one of two things. Either you are smart enough to learn, or you are too scared to speak. I will know which one by lunch." Malik's answer was calm. "You finished?" The laughter stopped again. Brick's smile narrowed. He had expected pleading, anger, perhaps a quick apology. Calmness gave him nothing to control. "I finish when I decide you understand." Malik lifted his eyes, not in challenge, but in acknowledgement. "I understand that Officer Anderson saw you strike me." Anderson unfolded his arms. "What I saw was two inmates having a disagreement," he said. "If either of you wants to turn it into something more serious, I have empty cells waiting." Brick stepped back, satisfied. The warning had landed exactly where he wanted it. If Malik reported the assault, Anderson would call it mutual conflict. If Malik defended himself, both men would be punished. The official version had been prepared before Malik ever entered the dayroom. Malik looked once toward the camera mounted near the ceiling. Its small indicator light was dark. Brick followed his glance and smiled. "You keep looking for witnesses," he said. "You should start looking for permission." He walked away to a table near the television, where two other inmates moved aside without being asked. Anderson remained still until Brick sat down. Only then did he return to his desk and begin writing on a clipboard. Malik picked up his identification card and slid it beneath his shirt. His cheek burned, but the pain was not what held his attention. Anderson had glanced at the dead camera before Brick struck him. Brick had known no officer would interfere. Everyone in the room had recognized the ritual. Malik had been at Northgate State Prison for less than 18 hours, and the institution had already told him how it worked. If you believe restraint can be more powerful than revenge, take a moment to like this story and subscribe. The request would have sounded simple outside those walls. Inside Northgate, every action carried weight. A raised hand could become an assault charge. A protest could become disobedience. A frightened step backward could invite the next attack. Malik understood that the difference between survival and disaster was often measured in movements too small for anyone else to notice. He rose from the table and carried his tray toward the return window. Jaylen remained near the wall, still staring at the spoon he had dropped. A fading bruise ran beneath his right ear. Another mark, yellow at the edges, showed above his collar. Malik paused beside him. "You should eat before they close the window." Jaylen picked up the spoon. "I'm not hungry." "Keep the bread." Jaylen looked toward Brick's table. "It is not mine." The answer told Malik more than an explanation would have. He placed his unopened bread beside Jaylen's tray and continued walking. Behind him, Brick called across the room. "Carter!" Malik stopped. Brick pointed at the bread. "Food moves through me in this unit." Malik faced him. "It came from my tray." "That is why this is your first lesson." Anderson's pen continued moving over the clipboard, though he had no reason to be writing. Malik returned to Jaylen's table, picked up the bread, and carried it to Brick. He placed it on the table without throwing it or pushing it toward him. Brick examined the packet. "You learn quickly." "No," Malik said. "I observe quickly." Brick's smile fell away, exposing the anger it had been hiding. Malik left the day room before the response could become another performance. As the steel door closed behind him, several men began speaking again, but the sound never recovered its earlier ease. Northgate had been built from concrete, steel, and repetition. The same doors opened at the same hours. The same commands traveled down the same corridors. At 6:40 a.m., the unit woke. At 7:15 a.m., breakfast movement began. Count occurred before lunch, after dinner, and through the night. Predictability was supposed to create order. Instead, it gave men like Brick a calendar. Malik had arrived from a diagnostic facility after spending more than 3 years in state custody. Northgate was not the first prison he had seen, but it was the first where violence seemed less hidden than organized. Men did not merely fear Brick, they anticipated him. They left specific seats empty. They carried commissary bags at certain times. They avoided the showers during Anderson's shifts. The pattern was visible because everyone had been trained to pretend it did not exist. Malik returned to his assigned cell on the lower tier. His bunkmate, an older man named Edwin Ross, sat on the lower mattress folding a gray shirt into a precise square. Edwin glanced at Malik's cheek. "You met Mason." He introduced himself. "He does that to everyone he thinks will pay." Malik sat on the upper bunk. "And the ones who do not?" "They still pay, just differently." Edwin placed the shirt beside a small stack of clothing. "You should know, Anderson is not going to stop him." I noticed. Noticing and proving are separate problems. Malik leaned against the wall. Beneath his mattress rested a thin folder containing legal correspondence, court transcripts, and copies of motions prepared by Fiona Mercer, his post-conviction attorney. Those pages mattered more than the swelling across his face. 2 months earlier, Fiona had located surveillance footage from a business across the street from the incident that sent Malik to prison. The prosecution had described him as the aggressor in a violent confrontation outside a closed recreation center. The recovered recording showed another man advancing first with a metal bar. It also showed Malik retreating before he acted. The footage did not guarantee freedom. Nothing in court moved that quickly or cleanly. Fiona still needed authentication, witness statements, and a hearing. The state would argue about angles, missing seconds, and what happened before the recording began. Yet for the first time since sentencing, Malik's case had shifted from hope to evidence. His disciplinary record was part of that effort. For 3 years he had avoided fights, contraband, insolence charges, and every trap that could turn restraint into an admission of weakness. Fiona had warned him that the new evidence would receive attention. Prosecutors might search his prison file for proof that the original conviction reflected his character. A violent disciplinary report, even one based on a distorted account, could give them exactly what they wanted. That was why Malik had remained seated after Brick's hand struck his face. Edwin watched him carefully. "You are thinking about reporting it." "I am thinking about recording it." "That sounds like the same thing in here." "It is not." Edwin gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "You really are new." The cell door opened for morning work assignments. Anderson entered the range with a list in his hand. He called several names, then paused outside Malik's cell. "Carter, sanitation detail." Malik climbed down from the bunk. "My assignment sheet says laundry." "Assignments change." "When was it changed?" Anderson's gaze moved to the mark on Malik's cheek. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who had trouble in the day room." "I did not have trouble. I was struck while you watched." Edwin stopped folding clothes. Anderson stepped closer to the bars. "You should be careful with accusations. Reports have consequences." "So does failing to report an assault." For a second, Anderson's expression revealed more than anger. It showed calculation. He was trying to decide whether Malik was impulsive or deliberate. "Sanitation," he repeated. "Move." Malik followed the work line downstairs. Keon Archer, the unit orderly, waited beside a cart filled with cleaning supplies. He wore the expression of a man who belonged nowhere and therefore moved everywhere. His uniform was cleaner than those around him. A pencil rested behind one ear. A ring of storage keys hung from his belt, though inmates were not supposed to carry access keys without direct supervision. Keon handed Malik a mop. "Lower showers." Malik looked at the assignment board. His name had been placed beside the rear storage corridor, the least visible section of the unit. "Who changed the list?" Keon smiled. "Lists change." "So I have heard." "You are going to hear many things. The useful skill is knowing which ones require an answer." Malik took the mop. As he entered the corridor, he saw Brick standing near the showers with 2 inmates beside him. One held a mesh laundry bag. The other carried several sealed food packets. Brick did not look surprised. "Sanitation," he said. "That suits you." Malik placed the bucket against the wall. "I was assigned here." "Everything is assigned here." Brick nodded toward the cleaning cart. "Your first commissary order arrives Thursday." Malik said nothing. "You will bring half to this shower before evening count." "Half of what?" "Everything you do not need." "And you decide what I need?" Brick stepped closer. "I decide whether you sleep without someone pouring water on your legal papers. I decide whether the men above you make noise all night. I decide whether you walk into the shower alone or with company." His voice remained controlled, almost instructional. The threat was sharper because he delivered it without raising his volume. "You think that court folder makes you important," Brick continued. "It makes you easy to measure. A man waiting for good news will surrender more than a man with nothing left." Malik's eyes moved toward the corridor entrance. Anderson stood there pretending to inspect a light fixture. "How much does the officer receive?" Malik asked. The two inmates beside Brick shifted uneasily. Brick's face tightened. "You should not ask questions when you already know the answer will hurt. I asked because you collect during his shifts." Anderson turned from the light. "Mason, move along." Brick smiled again. The command sounded official, but it carried no urgency. He walked away with the other inmates, brushing Malik's shoulder as he passed. Anderson waited until they were gone. "You are creating problems." "I was sent to the same corridor where he collects property." "You were sent to clean." "Then perhaps the camera will show that." Anderson glanced toward the corner above the showers. A camera housing faced the corridor, but the lens had been covered with a thin layer of gray residue. "You seem interested in cameras." "I am interested in accurate records." "Records say what staff observe." "That is not the same thing." Anderson approached until only the mop handle separated them. "Let me explain Northgate to you. Men who adjust do their time. Men who challenge every instruction make their own days longer. You can call that unfair. You can write it on every form in the building. The doors will still open when I decide they open." Malik met his eyes. "And close when you decide they close." Anderson's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "Now you are learning." He left the corridor. Malik looked at the covered camera, the storage door, and the wet footprints Brick's group had left near the shower entrance. He had survived institutions by separating what he knew from what he could prove. At Northgate, that distance was wider than usual, but it was not impossible to cross. During lunch, Jaylen sat alone again. This time his tray held only beans and a drink. The bread, fruit, and dessert were gone. Malik took the seat across from him. Jaylen's eyes moved toward Brick before returning to the table. "You should sit somewhere else." "Why?" "Because he is watching." "He was watching before I sat down." Jaylen tore the edge from his napkin. "He says you think you are different." "Do I?" "You keep looking at things." "That usually helps." "Not here." Malik studied the younger man's posture. Jaylen's knees were pressed together beneath the table. His shoulders curved forward. He had positioned himself so close to the wall that standing would require him to turn sideways. "You are trapping yourself," Malik said. Jaylen looked confused. "With what?" "The wall. Move your chair forward." "I do not understand." "If someone approaches, you need room to stand." Jaylen glanced at Malik's swollen cheek. "That did not help you." Malik accepted the point without reacting. No, it did not. Across the room, Brick lifted Jaylen's missing dessert in a silent toast before eating it. Malik lowered his voice. "Keep both feet beneath you. Do not cross them. If a person grabs your shirt, turn your shoulder instead of pulling straight back." Jaylen stared at him. "You teach fighting?" "Balance." "That sounds like fighting." "Fighting begins with wanting to hurt someone. Balance begins with staying upright." Jaylen moved his chair forward by a few inches. The adjustment was small enough that Brick did not notice. Malik did. By Thursday, the tax became impossible to dismiss as isolated theft. Commissary bags arrived after noon count. Men lined up beside a caged window, signed paper receipts, and carried their purchases back to the unit. Within an hour, Brick occupied a table at the rear of the day room, while inmates approached one by one. Anderson was the only officer on the floor. Some men surrendered coffee. Others handed over soup packets, hygiene products, or sealed envelopes. Brick inspected each contribution before Keon placed it in a laundry cart beneath folded towels. No one concealed the operation from Anderson. The officer walked past the table twice. Malik remained near the stairs with his own bag unopened. Brick called to him. "Bring it here." Every head in the room lowered without appearing to move. Malik carried the bag to the table and placed it in front of Brick. Brick opened it. Inside were writing paper, envelopes, 2 bars of soap, toothpaste, powdered drink mix, and a small package of cookies. "You shop like an old man." "I buy what I use." Brick removed the paper and envelopes. "These are valuable. They are legal supplies." Everything becomes legal supplies when a man is afraid to say he owes a debt. Malik reached for the paper. Brick placed his palm over it. "You touched my property once," Malik said. "Do not make it a habit." The room tightened around them. Brick leaned back. "There he is. I knew that quiet act had an ending." Anderson looked up from the desk. "Is there a problem?" Brick kept his eyes on Malik. "Carter is confused about how sharing works." Malik answered without looking away. "He took property from my commissary bag." Anderson approached. "Mason, give him the paper." Brick released it immediately. For a moment, it appeared that Anderson had chosen order over corruption. Then, the officer removed Malik's soap, toothpaste, drink mix, and cookies. "You are over the storage allowance," Anderson said. "I received those items today." "You were transferred with hygiene supplies." "1 partial bar of soap." Anderson placed the confiscated goods into Keon's cart. "They will be inventoried." Brick smiled. Problem solved. Malik understood the message. Brick did not need to steal if Anderson could confiscate. The property would reach the same destination through a different pair of hands. "Write me a receipt," Malik said. Anderson stared at him. "For what?" "Every item you removed. You are not entitled to a receipt for temporary storage." "Then document the storage location." Keon stopped pushing the cart. Anderson's composure thinned. "Return to your cell." Malik picked up the paper and envelopes. "After I received documentation, I gave you a direct order, and I am requesting an inventory before leaving the property." Men around the day room have begun watching again. Anderson could force Malik to the floor, but doing so over toothpaste and cookies would create questions, especially with so many witnesses. He tore a blank sheet from the desk pad, wrote several vague words, and signed his initials. Malik read it. "It does not list the items. You can accept it or receive nothing." Malik folded the paper and slipped it into his folder. "I will accept that you wrote it." He returned to his cell carrying only the supplies Brick had no use for. That evening, Malik prepared a grievance. He wrote without emotion. At approximately 1:40 p.m., he had observed multiple inmates surrendering commissary goods to Brick Mason in the presence of Officer Floyd Anderson. Anderson had removed specific items from Malik's bag without identifying a valid rule or completing a detailed property receipt. Malik also documented the earlier slap, the inactive dayroom camera, and Anderson's refusal to report the assault. He did not accuse Anderson of accepting payment. He stated only what he had personally seen. Edwin read the first line from the opposite bunk. "You name Mason and Anderson on the same form, that paper will disappear. Then its disappearance becomes evidence." only if someone knows it existed. Malik copied the grievance onto 2 sheets of legal paper. One remained in his folder. The second became part of a letter to Fiona. He did not describe the entire scheme. Instead, he listed dates, locations, and the grievance subject. Edwin watched him seal the envelope. "You trust your attorney that much?" "I trust records held outside this building." "That is not what I asked." "It is the answer that matters." The next morning, Malik approached Keon during open movement. A locked metal box for grievances stood near the unit entrance, but inmates were required to hand emergency complaints to designated staff. Malik held the folded form toward him. "This concerns immediate safety." Keon did not take it. "I am an orderly. You distribute and collect grievance forms. I distribute them. Collection is different." "Who receives emergency grievances?" "Lieutenant Blake." "Where is she?" "Busy." Malik kept his hand extended. Keon looked toward Anderson, who was standing at the far desk. "You should put it in the box." "The instructions say safety complaints may be submitted directly." Keon smiled with only one side of his mouth. "You read instructions. That is going to make your life complicated." "Will you document that I attempted to submit it?" The smile disappeared. Keon took the form. "I will deliver it." "At what time?" "You are not questioning me." "I am recording the transfer." Keon glanced at the wall clock. 8:20 a.m. Malik repeated the time once and walked away. At 10 minutes after 9, Keon entered a small office behind Anderson's desk. Through the narrow window, Malik saw him unfold a piece of paper. Anderson read it. Neither man looked toward the grievance box. By afternoon, Brick knew what Malik had written. He found Malik near the phones. "You told a story about me." "I submitted a safety complaint." "You used my name." "You used your hand." Brick moved closer until Malik could smell powdered drink mix on his breath. "I offered you a simple arrangement. You could have handed over a few supplies and kept your court papers dry. Instead, you wrote my name beside an officer's." "I wrote what happened." Brick pointed toward the phones. "You keep writing my name as if ink can make you dangerous. Every complaint only shows me what you are trying to protect." Malik glanced toward the phones. "Then you should be worried about how much you have already shown me." Brick's jaw shifted. "You keep trying to make me feel small. I am trying to understand why you need permission to feel large." The insult struck more deeply than shouting would have. Brick raised his hand, then stopped before swinging. He had already learned that slapping Malik produced no satisfying reaction. Another public assault might make him look less powerful, not more. He lowered his hand and smiled. "When you finally fight back, everyone will say I was right about you." Malik watched him walk away. The threat did not end with pain. It reached toward the hearing, Fiona's evidence, and the possibility of release. Brick had been told where to press. Several days passed without a response to Malik's grievance. During that time, Jaylen's condition worsened. He began skipping breakfast. His hands shook during count. One evening, Malik saw him exiting the rear shower with a torn collar and a thin line of blood beneath his nose. Jaylen tried to pass without speaking. Malik blocked neither the corridor nor his path. He simply walked beside him. "What happened?" "I slipped." "On what?" "Water." "That injured your collar?" Jaylen wiped his nose. You cannot help. Perhaps not, but I can listen. They reached the stairwell. Jaylen stopped where neither tear could see them clearly. Mason says, I owe for protection. From whom? From him. How long? Since I arrived. Jaylen pressed a folded tissue beneath his nose. My mother sends money when she can. He takes the food. Last week there was not enough, so Anderson put me on laundry duty near the storage room. They wanted me to carry a package to another unit. What was inside? I did not open it. Did you carry it? Jaylen nodded. And now? They want me to do it again. Malik took in the trembling hands, the injured collar, and the fear behind every answer. Do not agree while you are alone with them. That means no. It means make them ask where others can see. Anderson is the one asking. Then remember the time, place, and exact words. Jaylen gave a strained laugh. You think words matter here? Words matter when accounts stop matching. That sounds like something a lawyer says. It is something a man learns when others control the paper. Jaylen looked at him for several seconds. Why did you not hit Mason when he slapped you? Malik turned toward the stairwell opening. Because one swing from me would become their report, while his slap disappeared. That is not fear. Fear and restraint can exist in the same room. Jaylen considered the answer. What should I do if they corner me again? If they corner you again, speak clearly enough for the corridor to hear. Say the time. Say who is present. Keep your hands visible and do not let them move you into a room without witnesses. Jaylen looked doubtful. You think saying the time will stop them? No, Malik said. It may stop them from owning every version of what happened. Jaylen nodded slowly. How do you know to think like that? I used to teach young men how to stay calm. At a prison? Before prison. Malik stepped back before the conversation could reach further. The past was not something he discussed casually. At Northgate, information became property. The less Brick and Anderson understood about him, the fewer tools they possessed. The following morning, Lieutenant Heather Blake entered the unit. She moved with the rigid certainty of someone who viewed procedure as a personal weapon. Her uniform was perfectly pressed. A narrow binder rested beneath one arm. Anderson met her near the desk and spoke quietly before pointing toward Malik. Blake called him into the interview room. A camera was mounted in one corner. Unlike the dayroom camera, its indicator light was active. She placed a form on the table. You submitted a grievance alleging theft, assault, camera failure, staff misconduct, and threats. I submitted one safety grievance describing connected events. You included multiple issues. They concern the same continuing risk. Our rules require one issue per grievance. The officer enabled the inmate making the threat. That is your interpretation. It is my direct observation. Blake tapped the form. This grievance was received yesterday. I handed it to Keon Archer 6 days ago at 8:20 a.m. There is no receipt. He refused to provide one. Then you cannot establish timely submission. Malik looked at the date stamped across the top. Someone had held the grievance until the filing period nearly expired. Mr. Archer is an inmate, Blake continued. You should not entrust official documents to other inmates. He collects forms for the unit. He says you placed it under a cleaning cart. That is false. You are accusing another person of lying. I am identifying a contradiction. Blake folded her hands. You have been at Northgate less than 2 weeks. You have already accused an officer, an orderly, and another inmate of misconduct. That pattern suggests difficulty adjusting. The pattern began with an assault, which no witness has confirmed. Officer Anderson stood in the room. He reported a verbal disagreement. The mark remained on my face for 2 days. Did medical staff diagnose an injury? Anderson refused my request to visit medical. Blake turned a page in the binder. There is no written medical request. Because he denied me a form. Again, no documentation. The conversation had been built as a closed circle. Every missing record proved the event had not occurred, even when staff controlled whether records existed. Malik sat back. What happens to the grievance? It will be rejected for raising more than one issue. Will I receive the rejection in writing? Yes. And an appeal form? If applicable. It is applicable. Blake's eyes sharpened. You are very confident about rules. Rules are the only language this building claims to respect. That kind of attitude creates unnecessary conflict. No, selective enforcement creates conflict. For the first time, Blake looked toward the camera, as though remembering it was recording. This interview is complete. Malik did not move. I want a copy of the grievance with the received date. You will receive the appropriate response. I asked for a copy. Blake pressed a button beside the door. Anderson entered. Escort Carter back to the unit. Malik stood. As he passed Blake, she spoke without looking up. You should focus on your conduct. Court cases do not erase prison behavior. The sentence confirmed that Anderson had discussed Fiona and the pending hearing with her. Malik paused only long enough to let the implication settle. That is exactly what someone wants me to forget. Back in the unit, Brick was waiting. He leaned against the upper-tier rail with both hands spread wide. How was your meeting? Malik continued toward his cell. Brick followed along the rail above him. She tell you your little complaint had too many feelings in it? Several inmates looked toward Malik, then away. Brick's knowledge was no longer subtle. Blake had barely concluded the interview, yet he already knew its result. You should write another one, Brick called. Maybe this time complain that nobody likes you. Malik reached his cell and turned. You sound nervous for someone who claims nothing happened. Brick's amusement vanished. I sound generous. I am giving you time to understand. Understand what? That paper cannot stop a fist. Malik looked toward Anderson's desk. No, but sometimes it shows who opened the door. The confrontation might have ended there if Anderson had not announced recreation movement. Men lined up along the lower tier. Malik joined them, keeping several places between himself and Brick. The recreation room contained exercise equipment, tables, and a metal rack where meal trays were temporarily stored after special programs. The main camera covered the center floor. A narrow space beside the rack remained outside its view. Anderson positioned himself near the entrance. Brick entered last. Malik saw the arrangement immediately. Keon had left a wet floor sign near the center, forcing movement toward the blind side. Two of Brick's associates occupied the only alternate path. Jaylen stood near the wall, already pale. Malik moved toward an exercise bench instead. Anderson pointed. Carter, clear those trays. That is kitchen duty. It is a direct order. Malik approached the rack. Brick reached it from the opposite side. He lifted a metal tray and smiled. You always look so careful. I prefer accuracy. Let us test that. He swung the tray toward Malik's head. Malik shifted less than a full step. His left hand touched Brick's wrist, not striking, but redirecting. The tray passed beside his ear and crashed against the rack. Before Brick could recover, Malik released him and moved backward with both hands open. The exchange took only a second. To an untrained observer, Brick had missed. To Brick, it felt like something else. His arm had been guided past its target with almost no visible effort. Malik had known the direction of the swing before the tray moved. Anger replaced surprise. Brick lunged. Anderson shouted, "Stop resisting!" Malik had not touched anyone. Brick grabbed the front of his shirt. Malik turned his shoulder, causing the larger man's grip to slide free. He stepped into open space and stopped again. I am not fighting, Malik said. Brick rushed forward a second time. This time, Anderson seized Malik from behind, while one of Brick's associates blocked the camera. On the floor! Malik lowered himself, rather than forcing Anderson to take him down. Brick kicked the fallen tray toward the wall and stepped back before the camera view cleared. Anderson pressed a knee between Malik's shoulder blades. Threatening an inmate, refusing orders, aggressive movement, he said loudly enough for witnesses to hear. You wanted a record, now you have one. Malik turned his face to the side. The camera will show I never struck him. The camera shows what the report explains. Blake arrived within minutes, far too quickly for someone stationed in another building. That suggested she had been nearby before the confrontation began. Jaylen attempted to speak. Mason swung first. Blake raised one hand. Return to your housing area. I saw it. You are not part of this incident. He used the tray. Anderson pointed toward Jaylen. Failure to disperse. Jaylen fell silent. Malik was handcuffed and escorted through the unit, while Brick stood beside the damaged rack, breathing heavily. No restraint was placed on him. At the segregation intake desk, Anderson completed the disciplinary report. Malik watched the sentences appear upside down across the form. Inmate Carter advanced aggressively toward inmate Mason. Inmate Carter used trained defensive movements, indicating preparation for physical confrontation. Inmate Carter failed repeated verbal orders to stop. Malik looked up. Trained defensive movements? Anderson covered the form. You redirected a metal object. I avoided being struck. You grabbed his arm. I made brief contact with his wrist. That sounds trained to me. Malik studied him. Anderson did not know what he had seen, but he understood that it did not resemble panic. Where is Mason's disciplinary charge? Under review. Was he searched? Not relevant. Will the tray be preserved? Anderson set down his pen. You do not conduct the investigation. No, I preserve questions for the people who will. Anderson leaned across the desk. You will spend enough time in that cell to miss your hearing. The court date is not controlled by Northgate. Transportation is. Telephone access is. Legal calls are. You are admitting retaliation. I am explaining scheduling. The segregation door opened. Malik was placed in a narrow cell with a steel bunk, a thin mattress, and a frosted window that allowed light without a view. His legal folder had been removed for inventory. He was told it would arrive after inspection. Hours passed. The silence gave him room to reconstruct every movement. Brick's position near the rack, the associate blocking the camera, Blake's rapid arrival, Anderson's wording in the report. None of it had been improvised. They had wanted a disciplinary incident, but the tray had missed and Malik had refused to strike. Now they were attempting to convert avoidance into aggression. Near evening, a food slot opened. A tray slid through, followed by 3 sheets of paper. The first was the disciplinary charge. The second was a property inventory. The third was a notice that Malik's grievance had been rejected for containing multiple issues. His legal folder was not listed on the inventory. Malik pressed the call button. No one responded. He pressed it again several minutes later. A different officer appeared. "My legal materials are missing. Property handles intake. They were taken with me." "Submit a request. I need a form. Forms come on morning rounds. My deadline to appeal this disciplinary charge begins today." The officer looked at the papers through the window. "You have paper. I need the official form. Morning rounds." The officer left. Malik sat on the edge of the bunk. Anger would have been easy. It would also have consumed the attention he needed. He turned over the grievance rejection and wrote on the blank side with a short pencil from the tray. Date of removal. Time of segregation intake. Officer present. Missing legal folder. Denied appeal form. When the official record was hostile, memory had to become disciplined. Fiona learned of the incident from a brief electronic notice stating that her client's scheduled call had been canceled because of restrictive housing. She contacted Northgate and received 3 different explanations. The first employee claimed Malik had requested cancellation. The second said the unit was under lockdown. The third stated that Malik had lost telephone privileges following a violent incident. By the next afternoon, she had obtained a copy of Anderson's disciplinary report. She read it twice. The language did not describe a fight. It described movement. Malik had supposedly advanced, redirected an object, and assumed an aggressive posture. No injury was reported. No weapon was recovered from him. The report mentioned repeated orders, but listed no independent staff witness. Fiona requested preservation of recreation room footage, the damaged tray, radio communications, use of force records, and housing unit logs. She also attached the copy of Malik's grievance that he had mailed before the incident. The prison's response stated that no matching grievance had been filed on the date Malik identified. That discrepancy mattered. Several days later, Blake conducted the disciplinary hearing in a small room near segregation. Malik entered, wearing wrist restraints. His legal folder had been returned, but several pages were out of order, and Fiona's latest letter was missing. Blake sat behind a desk with Anderson's report in front of her. "You are charged with threatening behavior, failure to obey, and aggressive contact. I request the recreation video. Security footage is confidential. I request that the hearing officer review it." It was reviewed. By whom? Authorized staff. What did it show? Blake turned to the next page. It does not provide a complete view of the incident. Then it does not support the report. It also does not disprove it. I request Jaylen Foster as a witness. His statement was excluded. On what basis? He is housed in the same unit and may be subject to influence. He attempted to speak before I was removed. Blake looked at Malik over the top of the form. You are not here to question staff decisions. I am here because staff decisions created the charge. Your attitude is being noted. So is the refusal to consider evidence. She placed her pen down. You believe every procedure is a contest. No, I believe procedures should produce facts. Officer Anderson observed you use a trained movement against Mason. Moving away from a tray is not misconduct. You took hold of his wrist to prevent the object from hitting my head. That required physical contact. Brief, defensive contact. You could have stepped away. I did. Blake's eyes remained on him for a long moment. How did you know where to place your hand? The question arrived too casually. Malik understood that both she and Anderson were searching for an explanation. His movement had been faster and cleaner than they expected from a man they had classified as passive. I saw the tray. Most people raise their arms. Most people get hit. Blake's expression changed by a fraction. What did you do before incarceration? Employment history is not part of this hearing. It may explain your behavior. My behavior was refusing to fight. She returned to the report. The charge is sustained. Before reviewing my witness, he is unavailable. He is housed one building away. The decision has been made. Malik leaned back. So this was not a hearing. It was an opportunity for you to respond. An opportunity without evidence is decoration. Blake ended the proceeding and imposed segregation, loss of recreation, and suspension of program access. She also recommended a classification review that could affect Malik's placement and transportation. As officers led him back to the cell, she added one final sentence. Perhaps missing a court appearance will teach you that conduct has consequences. Malik stopped. The escorting officer tightened his grip. Blake had spoken too clearly. Scheduling interference was no longer an implication. Malik faced forward and continued walking. That evening, he wrote Fiona a letter containing only verifiable facts. He did not accuse Blake of conspiring with Anderson. He quoted her exact words. He listed the excluded witness, denied footage, missing pages, and imposed restrictions. Before sealing the letter, he wrote a second copy in the narrow margins of an old court transcript. The duplicate remained hidden in plain sight. Fiona responded aggressively but carefully. She notified the court that Northgate had restricted Malik's legal communication following a disputed disciplinary incident. She requested confirmation that his transportation would not be canceled without judicial notice. She also sent a formal preservation demand to the prison administration and the State Corrections Legal Office. Deputy Warden Paul Bradley received the demand before lunch. He summoned Anderson and Blake to his office. Bradley had spent 2 decades learning how to express improper goals through proper language. He did not ask whether Malik had been targeted. He asked why one inmate had generated correspondence outside the institution. He did not order anyone to destroy records. He reminded them that unnecessary documentation created unnecessary exposure. We have a regional review next month, he said. Our assault numbers are down. They need to remain down. Anderson shifted in his chair. Carter is turning routine management into allegations. Then stop giving him material. He refuses to adjust. Bradley looked at Blake. Can the disciplinary findings stand? Yes. Can the footage contradict it? It is incomplete. That was not my question. Blake chose her words. It shows Mason initiating movement with the tray. Carter redirects his arm. The camera angle is blocked before Officer Anderson restrains him. Bradley's gaze moved to Anderson. You wrote that Carter advanced. He moved toward Mason. To avoid the tray? He made contact. Bradley rubbed the bridge of his nose. You both understand that a court order can reach video faster than an internal review. Anderson lowered his voice. The file can reflect a retention error. Bradley looked at him sharply. No one in this office is discussing errors. Silence followed. Bradley closed Fiona's letter. Carter should not remain in segregation long enough to appear retaliatory. Return him after the minimum period. Place him somewhere manageable. Blake understood the instruction. Near Mason? Bradley did not answer directly. Place him where existing dynamics are already established. If he creates another incident, make certain the report is complete. The meeting ended without a single explicit command to harm Malik. That was how Bradley protected himself. He built a path and allowed others to choose the destination. In segregation, Malik's world narrowed to paper, footsteps, and the meals passing through the slot. The stillness might have broken another man. For him, it became a place to organize. He reconstructed the commissary collection schedule from memory. Anderson worked the unit on alternating days. Keon performed sanitation movement before each collection. Brick's demands increased after deposits arrived. Jaylen's injuries appeared after laundry assignments. Blake received grievances only after delays. The pieces did not yet form proof, but they formed direction. On the 9th morning, a nurse named Ashley Grant arrived to conduct routine checks. She examined Malik's healing cheek, reviewed the tablet in her hand, and asked whether he had any current injuries. No. Any denied medical requests? Yes. She paused. When? The morning after I arrived. Officer Anderson denied access following an assault. She looked at the tablet in her hand. There is no request. I know. Who assaulted you? Brick Mason. Her fingers stopped above the screen. Have you had dizziness? No. Vision changes? No. Then there is no current treatment need. Malik watched her. How many reports involving Mason have been rewritten? The nurse's face closed. I do not know what you mean. You recognize the name before I describe the injury. She lowered the tablet. You should be careful about assumptions. I did not make one. I asked the question. She glanced toward the segregation officer. Medical descriptions are sometimes revised after review. Revised? By whom? I did not say they were changed improperly. Did I say they were? The nurse placed the blood pressure cuff back into her bag. I cannot discuss another inmate's records. Then discuss mine. Record that I reported an assault and denial of access. She hesitated before typing. The delay was enough to show that the request created risk for her. Your statement is entered, she said. Will it remain entered? Her eyes met his. I cannot promise what happens after my shift. It was the first honest answer he had received from a Northgate employee. Then, remember the date, Malik said. She looked toward the officer again, then spoke quietly. I remember more dates than people think. She left without further explanation. 2 days later, Malik returned to general population. Edwin had been moved to another cell. Jaylen now occupied the lower bunk beneath Malik's assigned bed. The housing change was presented as routine. It was anything but routine. Jaylen stood as Malik entered. They moved Edwin yesterday. Where? Upper range. Who ordered it? Anderson brought the sheet. Malik placed his legal folder on the bunk and checked its contents. How often has Mason approached you? Jaylen looked toward the cell entrance. Every day. What does he want? The same delivery. Laundry package. Have you agreed? I told him I was sick. That excuse will not last. I know. Malik inspected the mattress seams, the vent, and the space beneath the sink. Jaylen watched him. What are you looking for? Something that does not belong to us. Did they put something here? Not yet. The answer did not comfort either man. During evening movement, Brick appeared at the cell door. You came back. Malik continued organizing his papers. Brick tapped the bars. I heard segregation made you quieter. It gave me time to write. You think those letters are armor? No. Armor is heavy. Brick's gaze shifted to Jaylen. You two look comfortable together. Jaylen stepped backward without noticing that he had placed himself against the wall. Malik saw it. Move to the open side, he said. Brick smiled. Teaching him manners? Teaching him not to trap himself. Against what? Malik finally faced him. People who need walls to feel strong. Brick entered the cell. The space immediately became smaller. Jaylen's breathing accelerated. Brick positioned himself between the bunks, close enough to touch both men. You have been talking about me, Brick said. I wrote about what you did. You keep hiding behind past tense. Let us discuss what comes next. His hand moved toward Jaylen's collar. Malik stepped between them, not quickly enough to appear aggressive, but with such precise timing that Brick found himself facing Malik instead. For an instant, Malik's posture changed. His weight rested evenly across the balls of his feet. His chin lowered. His shoulders loosened. His hands remained open at waist height. Brick stared at him. Something in the stance felt familiar, though he could not place it. Then Malik relaxed and stepped aside. Do not touch him. Brick looked from Malik to Jaylen. You just gave an order in my unit. I gave a warning in my cell. Brick moved closer. You still think choosing not to fight makes you disciplined. It makes you useful. I can keep pressing until you finally break, and when you do, Anderson writes the ending. Malik's voice remained level. That is why you keep pressing. You need someone else to prove you are dangerous. Brick's face flushed. I already proved it when I slapped you. No, you proved the officer would allow it. Brick raised the fist. At that moment, Anderson entered the range. Mason, out. Brick lowered his hand slowly. You heard him, he said to Malik. The officer saved you. Anderson waited until Brick had left before addressing Malik. Property inspection. Under whose authorization? Routine search. There was no unit announcement. It is targeted. Based on what information? Anderson stepped inside with Keon behind him. Step into the corridor. Malik moved outside with Jaylen. Keon began searching the cell while Anderson watched Malik rather than the property. The orderly opened legal folders, shook clothing, removed bedding, and ran his hand beneath the sink. His search avoided several ordinary hiding places and focused instead on Malik's mattress. That told Malik where the object would appear. Keon lifted the mattress and reached beneath it. Stop, Malik said. Anderson's hand moved toward his restraint pouch. "You do not give orders during a search." His hand went beneath the mattress before he showed the area. Keon withdrew a cloth-wrapped object. Anderson pointed. "Carter, step forward and pick that up." "No. Direct order. Photograph it where it was found." Anderson's eyes hardened. "Pick it up. Use gloves. Request a supervisor. Preserve the housing camera." Keon held the bundle away from his body. Anderson unfolded the cloth with his bare hand. Inside was a sharpened piece of metal approximately the length of a pen. Jaylen inhaled sharply. Anderson looked at Malik. "Possession of a weapon." "You contaminated it." "I recovered it from your mattress." "Keon recovered it after reaching beneath the mattress outside my view." "Pick it up for identification." "No." Refusal of a direct order. "Because touching it would destroy evidence." Anderson stepped close enough that their uniforms nearly met. "You prepared for this. I prepared for you." The words landed heavily. Keon looked away. Malik continued before Anderson could respond. "Seal the object. Photograph the location. Record everyone present. Preserve the camera beginning before the search." Anderson's hand rested on the restraint pouch. "You speak like you are conducting the investigation." "I speak like someone who knows evidence should survive one." For several seconds, neither man moved. Then a metal cup fell from the upper tier. It dropped through the open rail, struck one bar, and spun toward the corridor. Malik's right hand lifted, without his eyes leaving Anderson. He caught the cup, inches from Jaylen's face. His fingers closed around it cleanly. The range became silent. Malik placed the cup on the floor. An older inmate across the tier stared at him with sudden recognition. Not recognition of Malik's face, but of the motion, the relaxed hand, the timing, the absence of wasted movement. Malik saw the man notice. He also saw Anderson notice the man. "Everyone locked down!" Anderson shouted. Doors began closing across the range. Malik and Jaylen were returned to the cell while the weapon was carried away in the same cloth Keon had used to reveal it. No photographs were taken. No supervisor arrived. Through the bars, Malik watched Anderson speak quietly to Keon. The orderly looked frightened for the first time. That evening, Fiona received a short letter from the nurse who had examined Malik in segregation. It contained no confidential medical details. Instead, it stated that several injury narratives associated with the same housing unit had been altered after initial entry. The changes replaced references to assault with terms such as fall, recreation accident, or unknown cause. Fiona added the letter to the growing record and issued a second preservation demand. This one named specific cameras, search logs, medical audit trails, grievance receipts, disciplinary drafts, and housing assignments. She sent copies outside Northgate. Bradley received the notice before Anderson could fully rewrite the search report. The deputy warden read the list with growing irritation. Fiona was no longer reacting to isolated events. She was tracing a system. He summoned Blake. Why was a weapon search conducted without a supervisor? Anderson said the information was urgent. Where did the information come from? Confidential source. Which means Archer. Blake did not answer. Bradley placed the preservation demand on his desk. Carter's attorney knows about the camera. The housing footage may not show inside the cell. It will show who entered before the search. Blake folded her arms. Anderson says no one entered. Then the footage should help him. Neither believed that. Bradley walked to the window overlooking the central yard. Return Carter to normal movement. Do not isolate him again without something clear. Every restriction now looks retaliatory. What about Mason? Existing separation orders? None. Then none exist. Blake understood that Bradley wanted the men kept together. He also wanted no document showing that he had requested it. Carter has identified a specific threat. He has identified everyone as a threat. That is not accurate. Bradley turned. Do you want his attorney arguing that we acknowledge the risk? Blake's silence answered him. Maintain regular housing, he said. Allow routine recreation. If another event occurs, the record needs to show that staff responded. The phrase sounded responsible until one understood what had been omitted. Bradley did not say staff needed to prevent the event. Back in the unit, Malik began noticing changes. Anderson stopped speaking to him directly. Keon avoided his cell. Brick became quieter, which made him more dangerous. Jaylen received an assignment slip transferring him to evening recreation detail, despite never requesting the program. Malik received an identical slip. The enclosed recreation yard listed on the forms was used for small groups and disciplinary transitions. Its walls were high. Its entrance had a single controlled door. One main camera covered the center, but a maintenance notice had been taped beneath it for several weeks. Malik examined the slip. "What time did they give you?" he asked. 7:20 p.m. Same as mine. Jaylen's face tightened. Mason asked me this morning whether I liked fresh air. Where? Laundry corridor. Was Anderson present? He was at the far door. Malik looked across the day room. Brick sat alone, not collecting food, not making jokes, simply watching. Fiona called that afternoon. Anderson initially refused to release Malik, claiming the unit was preparing for count. Fiona contacted administration, and the call was finally permitted. Malik sat behind a scratched partition with the receiver pressed to his ear. "I received your letters," she said. "The grievance copy you mailed does not match the prison's version." "What changed?" "Your submission date. Several lines about Anderson are missing." "Do you have both copies?" "Yes." "Keep them separate." "I have sent preservation notices beyond the facility. The court also confirmed your transportation order remains active. They will try another disciplinary charge." "I know." Malik watched Anderson through the glass. "The next one may involve Jaylen Foster." "Has he agreed to speak?" "Not yet." "Do not pressure him." "I am not." Fiona paused. "Malik, I need you to hear this clearly. The new footage in your original case is strong, but the state will challenge everything. A serious prison incident gives them a distraction." "I understand." "Your record has helped us. Protect it." His eyes remained on Anderson. "That is what they are using." "What do you mean?" "They know I cannot respond." Fiona was quiet for a moment. "Can you request protective housing?" "The request would go through Blake. I can contact the central office. That may not move before tonight." "What happens tonight?" Malik looked at the recreation slip. "Routine movement." "Malik, I will document it." "That was not what I asked." He lowered his voice. "They placed Jaylen and me on the same enclosed yard schedule." "With Mason?" "I do not know yet." Fiona began speaking more quickly. "Give me the location." Before Malik could answer, Anderson ended the call from the control panel. The line went dead. Malik held the receiver for another second before replacing it. Anderson opened the booth door. Time expired. There were minutes remaining. Schedule changed. Document that you terminated a legal call after I identified a safety concern. Anderson's expression remained flat. You believe saying something creates a record. No, I believe you hearing it creates knowledge. That distinction reached him. Anderson stepped aside. Returned to the unit. At dinner, Jaylen barely ate. Malik forced himself to finish because hunger made judgment slower. Across the room, Brick consumed his meal with deliberate calm. The older inmate who had noticed Malik catch the cup passed near their table. He did not stop. "Your hands, remember," he murmured. Malik looked up. The man continued walking. Jaylen had heard. What does that mean? Nothing useful. He recognized you. He recognized movement. From where? Malik gathered his tray. Keep your attention on tonight. Jaylen stood. What do we do? Stay near the door. What if it does not open? Then stay behind me. Jaylen stared at him. You told me not to trap myself. I am telling you to choose the safest position available. That is not the same thing. No, Malik said. It is not. At 7:10 p.m., Anderson ordered them to prepare for movement. The unit seemed unnaturally settled. No television played. No one argued over the phones. Men who normally ignored recreation watched from their cells. Malik stepped into the corridor beside Jaylen. Anderson searched them carefully, checking waistbands, shoes, sleeves, and mouths. The thoroughness would later support a claim that neither man carried a weapon into the yard. Keon stood near the desk with a clipboard. 2 for enclosed recreation, Anderson said. Keon wrote their names. Anyone else? Anderson looked toward the upper tier. 3 more. Brick descended first. Behind him came 2 inmates Malik had seen at the metal tray incident. One was broad through the shoulders. The other kept his right hand close to his side. Jaylen whispered, "That is not routine." Malik watched Anderson unlock the corridor gate. No. Brick reached the line and smiled at Malik. You wanted witnesses, Anderson ordered them forward. The group moved through 2 controlled doors and down a passage connecting the housing building to the enclosed yard. The first door shut behind them before the second opened. Malik counted the cameras, 1 above the passage, 1 at the yard entrance, the main unit mounted inside. The maintenance notice was still taped beneath it. At the final gate, Malik stopped. I am requesting separation from Mason due to documented threats. Anderson stood at the control panel. Request denied. I am stating that I believe there is an immediate risk of assault. You are refusing recreation? I am requesting safe movement. You signed up. I did not. Anderson looked at the clipboard. Your name is on the list. I did not place it there. Brick waited beyond the gate, rolling his shoulders. Anderson pressed the release. The door opened. Jaylen took 1 step backward. Another officer should have been stationed inside the yard. The post was empty. Malik looked directly at Anderson. Record that you were warned. Anderson's eyes revealed nothing. Enter the yard. Malik moved through first. Jaylen stayed close behind him. Brick and the other 2 men followed. The yard was smaller than it appeared from the corridor. Concrete walls rose on every side. A steel bench was bolted near the center. Exercise bars stood along the far boundary. The only exit was the door behind them. Malik positioned himself where he could see all three men without turning his back on Jaylen. Brick walked toward the center. "You have spent weeks telling everyone what I did," he said. "Tonight, you are going to give them something better to write." Malik looked at the camera. The indicator appeared dark. Inside the control passage, Anderson watched through the narrow window. His hand rested beside the door switch. Malik met his gaze. Anderson pressed the second control. The steel lock engaged with a heavy mechanical sound. Brick smiled as the bolt slid into place. "Now," he said, "let us see how long your discipline survives, when nobody plans to open that door." Malik did not answer. The silence unsettled Brick more than fear would have. He had arranged the locked door, the empty officer post, and the two men spreading along the wall behind him. He expected Malik to plead, threaten, or finally lose control. Instead, Malik shifted half a step so Jaylen remained behind his left shoulder. Brick rolled his neck. "You have been hiding behind reports and lawyers," he said. "There is no paper in here, no witness who matters, just you, me, and the lesson you should have learned the first morning." One of the other inmates moved toward the far side of the yard. The second remained near the steel bench, his right hand still pressed against his waistband. Malik noticed the concealed hand. He also saw Anderson through the narrow window in the door. The officer stood close enough to watch. He made no attempt to call assistance. "Open the door," Malik said. Anderson did not react. Brick laughed. "He can hear you. That is what makes this useful." Malik kept his hands open. "You wanted a disciplinary incident. You already have enough people willing to write one. I want everyone to stop looking at me like you survived something. You slapped a seated man while an officer protected you." Brick's smile vanished. "You keep saying that." "Because it is the only victory you have." The words drove Brick forward. He threw a wide right hand toward Malik's head. Malik leaned just beyond its reach without taking his eyes from the man near the bench. Brick followed with a second swing, heavier than the first. Malik lifted his forearm, guided the blow past his shoulder, and stepped away. He did not counter. Brick stumbled forward, caught himself, and turned with fury rising through his face. "Stand still." "No!" The smaller inmate near the wall rushed Malik from the side. Malik pivoted, caught him at the shoulder, and directed him past without striking. The man collided with a concrete wall and dropped to one knee, more surprised than injured. Jaylen remained close to the door. "Officer Anderson," Malik called. "You are witnessing an assault." The officer looked down the corridor, as though checking whether anyone else was approaching. Brick charged again. This time, Malik allowed him to come closer. He lowered his center of balance, caught Brick's upper arm, and turned. Brick's own momentum carried him across the yard. He struck the steel bench with his thigh and nearly fell. The movement was smooth enough to look simple. It was not. Brick stared at Malik with a new uncertainty. "You have done this before." Malik did not respond. The man beside the bench finally withdrew his hidden hand. A narrow piece of sharpened metal flashed between his fingers. Jaylen saw it too late. The attacker did not move toward Malik. He lunged directly at Jaylen. Everything Malik had protected changed in that instant. The disciplinary record, the court hearing, and the years spent refusing every provocation remained important. None mattered more than the life behind him. Malik stepped across the weapon's path. His left forearm struck the attacker's wrist while his right hand controlled the elbow. He turned the arm away from Jaylen and drove the man against the wall. The sharpened metal scraped across Malik's sleeve before falling onto the concrete. He kicked it beneath the steel bench. Brick struck him from behind. The blow landed near Malik's ribs and forced air from his lungs. He turned before the second punch arrived, caught it against both forearms, and closed the distance. Brick tried to pull away, but Malik secured one arm, placed his weight against Brick's shoulder, and guided him downward. There was no dramatic wind-up, no uncontrolled exchange. Brick found himself on one knee with his wrist trapped against his own chest. The third inmate approached. Malik released Brick, stepped behind the bench, and placed the steel structure between them. "Stay back." The warning was quiet. The man stopped. Brick rose, breathing hard. "You think that makes you something?" Malik's lip had split. Blood touched the corner of his mouth. His voice remained steady. "I think it keeps him alive." Brick looked toward the improvised weapon beneath the bench. Then he looked at Jaylen. The calculation in his face frightened Jaylen more than his anger had. Brick moved toward the weapon. Malik reached it first. He did not pick it up. He planted his foot beside it and used the bench to block Brick's approach. "Leave it." Brick lowered his shoulder and drove forward. Malik absorbed the impact, turned at the waist, and redirected him into the bench. Brick's hand struck the steel edge. He cried out and pulled back. Malik could have followed. His body was positioned for it. One short movement would have dropped Brick onto the concrete. A second could have ensured he did not rise. Instead, Malik stepped away. Brick saw the opening and attacked again. Malik slipped outside the punch, placed one hand behind Brick's upper arm, and used his other forearm across the man's chest. Brick's balance disappeared. He went down on his back, with Malik controlling the descent just enough to keep his head from striking the floor. Before Brick could recover, Malik secured his wrist and shoulder. "Stop." Brick struggled. Malik increased the pressure by a fraction. "Stop." Brick's free fist struck uselessly against the concrete. His breathing became ragged. The other two inmates did not move. Jaylen stared at Malik as though the quiet man from the day room had been replaced by someone else. Yet Malik's face showed no pleasure. He was not enjoying Brick's helplessness. He was monitoring the improvised weapon, the two standing men, Jaylen's position, and the locked door. He looked toward Anderson. "The threat is controlled. Open the door." Anderson remained still. Then a distant alarm sounded. It did not come from the yard control panel. It came from the central corridor, followed by running footsteps and shouted instructions. Anderson turned sharply. A second officer appeared behind him, then another. Someone in Central Security had seen enough to activate the response. The door released. Officers entered with shields and restraints. Anderson pointed toward Malik. "Down. Get on the ground." Malik released Brick immediately, moved away from the weapon, and placed himself face down with his hands visible. Jaylen did the same. Brick rolled onto his side, clutching his wrist. "He attacked me," he shouted. "Carter planned the whole thing." Anderson restrained Malik first. "You just ended your court case," he said near Malik's ear. Malik turned his face enough to breathe. "You left the door locked." I responded when I became aware of the disturbance. "You watched through the window." "No one will support that." The officer leading the response team crouched beside the bench and pointed to the sharpened metal. "Do not touch it. Photograph before recovery." Anderson's expression tightened. The response officer looked toward the camera housing above the far wall. Central said the secondary feed showed a weapon. Anderson followed his gaze. A smaller camera had been mounted behind a protective plate several feet from the main unit. Its lens was nearly invisible unless viewed from beneath it. The maintenance notice under the old camera had hidden the installation work for a newly added backup system. The replacement had recorded everything. For the first time since Malik arrived at Northgate, Anderson looked afraid. Medical staff examined the 5 inmates separately. Malik had a bruised rib, a cut inside his lip, and a shallow scrape where the sharpened metal had torn through his sleeve. Jaylen had no physical injury, though his hands would not stop trembling. Brick's wrist was swollen but not broken. One of his associates had a bruised shoulder from striking the wall. The man who carried the weapon had a red mark around his wrist and no other injury. The medical findings did not resemble a savage attack by Malik. They resembled controlled restraint during an assault initiated by others. Anderson nevertheless began preparing his report. He described Malik as the central aggressor. He claimed the officer post had been temporarily empty because of an urgent call in another corridor. He wrote that he returned to observe Malik using advanced combat movements against several inmates. Before he could finish, Lieutenant Blake entered the medical station. She read the first page and lowered her voice. "Do not submit this yet. I know what I saw. Central Security copied the secondary feed." Anderson stopped writing. "Who authorized that camera?" "Regional Maintenance. It is part of the review preparation." "Can we restrict it?" "It already uploaded outside the facility." Anderson stared at the unfinished report. Blake took the pen from his hand. "Write only what can survive the recording." He still fought. He was attacked with a weapon. He injured Mason. Then describe the injury accurately. Anderson leaned closer. Bradley wanted an incident. Bradley wanted a complete record. That is the phrase he used. You were in the meeting, and nothing in that meeting instructed you to lock 5 inmates inside an unsupervised yard. The distance between them appeared immediately. For weeks, Blake had converted Anderson's conduct into procedural language. Now that video existed, she was preparing to describe him as acting alone. "You approve the movement list," he said. "I approved routine recreation." "You knew who was on it." "I reviewed names submitted by housing staff." "You told me Carter needed another charge." Blake's expression became cold. "Choose your next words carefully." Anderson looked toward the security officer standing outside the medical room. He lowered his voice again. "This does not end with me." "No," Blake said. "It ends with whoever the evidence reaches." Malik was placed in a holding cell rather than returned to segregation. His wrists remained cuffed through the food slot for nearly an hour before a shift commander ordered the restraints removed. Jaylen occupied the cell beside him. "Malik, I am here." "How did you do that?" Malik sat against the wall, one hand pressed carefully to his ribs. "Do what?" "You stopped all of them." "They stopped when they lost the advantage." "That is not what happened." Malik did not answer. Jaylen moved closer to the bars, separating the cells. "Mason had you on the floor the first week. He slapped you in front of everyone. You could have done that to him then." "Yes." The single word settled between them. Jaylen's voice dropped. "Why did you let him?" "I did not let him. I chose what I could survive afterward." "You knew how to fight the entire time." Malik looked at the concrete floor. "Knowing how to hurt someone does not make hurting him the correct choice." He tried to kill me. That changed the choice. Footsteps approached. Fiona entered the holding area with an administrator and a corrections attorney. She had driven to Northgate after receiving an automated notice that Malik had been involved in a serious incident. The prison initially refused entry, but the existence of preserved video changed its position. She stopped outside Malik's cell. "Are you injured?" "Bruised rib, cut lip." "Did you strike anyone after the threat ended?" "No." "Did you touch the weapon?" "No." "Did Anderson open the door when you requested help?" "No." The corrections attorney interrupted. "This is not a formal interview." Fiona looked at him. "Then you should stop listening." She returned her attention to Malik. "Central Security has the recording. A copy is being preserved outside Northgate. Jaylen needs protection. I have requested separation and transfer." The attorney spoke again. "Mr. Foster is not your client. He is a material witness to an assault involving my client. He is also an inmate subject to institutional management." Fiona's voice remained controlled. That phrase will sound useful when a court asks why institutional management placed him in a locked yard with the man who had been extorting him. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. Fiona stepped closer to the bars. "They intend to conduct an emergency disciplinary review tomorrow." "Blake?" "Most likely." "She cannot be neutral." "I have already objected." Malik studied her face. "You found something." "I found records from your life before prison. They explain why the video shows precision instead of panic, but I am not giving Northgate a preview of tomorrow's defense." Jaylen leaned closer to the bars. "What kind of records?" Malik looked toward the concrete floor. "The kind people misunderstand when they already want to call you dangerous." Fiona held his gaze. "Tomorrow, they will have to confront the difference between ability and intent." The corrections attorney looked from Fiona to Malik, but received no further explanation. Jaylen leaned against the bars. "All that time," he whispered. Malik looked toward him. "All that time, I was trying to leave." The emergency hearing took place the following afternoon. Blake attempted to retain control by limiting attendance, but Fiona arrived with written authorization from the corrections legal office. A Central Security supervisor joined through a secure video connection. Deputy Warden Bradley sat at the far end of the table, presenting himself as an observer. Malik entered in restraints. Fiona objected immediately. "My client complied with every order after the incident. The recording shows that. There is no basis for treating him as an active threat during this hearing." Blake ordered the wrist restraints removed, but left the ankle chain in place. She opened the file. "Mr. Carter is charged with fighting, assaultive conduct, and participation in group disturbance." Fiona placed the folder on the table. "Before any plea, we request review of the complete secondary camera footage. That material contains security-sensitive information. The central office has already authorized review." Bradley spoke for the first time. "We should proceed carefully. The institution has an obligation to protect camera locations." Fiona faced him. "The camera location is visible in the footage itself. What requires protection is the recording from alteration or loss." Blake pressed her lips together and started the video. The room watched Brick move toward Malik. They heard the threats through the camera microphone. They saw Malik ask for the door to be opened. They watched Anderson remain at the control window. When the improvised weapon appeared, No one spoke. The footage showed Malik crossing in front of Jaylen, redirecting the attacker's wrist and driving him into the wall. It showed Brick striking Malik from behind. It captured Malik controlling Brick, releasing him, and retreating. Most importantly, it showed Malik place himself on the ground the moment officers entered. The Central Security Supervisor paused the video. The door control record indicates Officer Anderson engaged the lock after all inmates entered. Blake looked toward Bradley. Bradley's face did not change. Fiona opened her folder. Lieutenant Blake, your earlier disciplinary finding described Malik's defensive movement as evidence of trained aggression. Are you relying on the same theory now? The level of skill remains relevant. Then the full history is relevant. She placed certified competition records beside the hearing file, followed by a faded newspaper photograph. The picture showed a younger Malik standing beneath bright arena lights with a medal around his neck. His expression was not triumphant. Even then, he appeared composed. Fiona read the brief identifying line. National Amateur Light Heavyweight Champion, Malik Carter. Blake glanced at the photograph, then back at the restrained man across from her. Fiona continued. He did not suddenly discover the ability to defend himself in that yard. He possessed it when Mason slapped him in the day room. He possessed it when a tray was swung toward his head. He possessed it when staff placed him in repeated contact with a documented threat. Every earlier incident demonstrates that Malik chose control, while your officers interpreted control as weakness. Bradley folded his hands. Past athletic success does not excuse violence. No, Fiona said. The recording excuses the force because it was necessary to protect Mr. Foster from an armed attack. The championship record establishes that Malik could have inflicted far greater injury and deliberately did not. Blake tried another direction. Mr. Carter could have remained near the door. The door was locked by staff. He could have avoided engaging Mason. He did until Mason's associate produced a weapon. He placed Mason on the ground after Mason struck him from behind. Fiona leaned forward. What precise action do you contend Malik should have taken while an armed inmate attacked a younger prisoner and the assigned officer refused to open the exit? Blake looked at the screen. No answer could survive the recording. The Central Supervisor spoke. Pending further investigation, these charges should not be sustained. Blake stiffened. This is an institutional hearing, and Central Security has an obligation to report evidence of staff misconduct. The video and access records have been referred to the Office of Professional Standards. Bradley finally looked unsettled. Referred by whom? By my director this morning. The hearing ended without a guilty finding. Malik was returned to temporary protective housing, but the decision no longer belonged entirely to Northgate. By evening, investigators arrived. Special Agent Bianca Hayes led the team. She was a former county investigator who had spent several years examining crimes and misconduct inside correctional facilities. She did not begin with accusations. She began with preservation. Her team secured the primary recording server, the backup feed, door control logs, radio traffic, recreation schedules, medical audit histories, and grievance databases. They collected Anderson's handwritten draft before he could replace it with a cleaner version. Hayes separated staff before interviews. Anderson claimed the door had been secured automatically. The control log showed a manual command under his identification. He said he had left the window before the violence began. The recording showed his face behind the glass. He insisted the alarm was activated the moment he saw a weapon. Central Record showed a delay of several minutes between the weapon's appearance and the alarm initiated by another officer. Each answer narrowed the space around him. Blake presented herself as a procedural supervisor who had relied on information from housing staff. Hayes showed her the grievance containing Malik's allegations against Anderson and Brick. The received date had been altered. Blake said clerical staff handled intake. Hayes produced system access records showing Blake's credentials had been used to edit the entry. Blake suggested someone else might have accessed her account. Hayes did not argue. She simply added the answer to the report. Hayes did not accuse Bradley of ordering the yard attack. She asked him to explain how a written safety warning moved from his office to a housing decision. Bradley described delegation, staff discretion, and ordinary classification procedure. His answers formed a careful chain in which responsibility always passed to someone below him. Hayes slid Fiona's preservation letter across the table and asked him to mark the point where the matter had left his authority. Bradley reached the receipt line bearing his own signature. His pen stopped. Hayes did not fill the silence with another question. She collected the promotion review notes from his desk and requested the regional email archive, calendar entries, and every message containing Malik's name. The investigation had moved beyond what Bradley was willing to say. It now concerned what his office had preserved. Keon was interviewed last. He entered expecting protection from Anderson and found the officer already removed from duty. Hayes placed photographs on the table. One showed Keon receiving Malik's grievance. Another showed him entering Malik's cell while the unit was at recreation. A third came from the search footage and captured his hand moving directly toward the location where the sharpened object appeared. Keon denied planting anything. Hayes played the corridor video. It showed him carrying the cloth-wrapped object into the cell hours before the search. His denial collapsed. He began by blaming Brick. Then he blamed Anderson. Finally, when Hayes explained that each false statement could create additional consequences, he described the entire arrangement. Anderson allowed Brick to collect commissary goods. Some products were traded through inmates in other units. Keon moved the property inside laundry carts. In exchange, Anderson influenced work assignments, searches, and disciplinary reports. Brick used violence against men who resisted. Blake rejected or delayed complaints that might expose the pattern. She did not direct every assault, but she ensured that official paperwork rarely named the correct aggressor. Bradley had never ordered Keon to plant contraband. Keon had barely spoken to him, yet Anderson frequently claimed that the deputy warden wanted reported violence reduced before the regional review. "Did Anderson tell you to place the sharpened metal in Carter's mattress?" Hayes asked. Keon stared at his hands. "Yes." "Why Carter?" "He would not pay. He kept writing. Anderson said his attorney was making noise outside." "Who arranged the enclosed yard list?" "Anderson gave it to me." "Did Lieutenant Blake know?" "I do not know. She approved the movement sheet." "Did Mason know the door would remain locked?" Keon hesitated. "He said Anderson promised enough time to make Carter lose control." Hayes stopped the interview and requested immediate protective placement for Keon. Cooperation did not erase his conduct, but leaving him in the same unit would invite retaliation and possibly silence a central witness. Northgate changed within days, though not in the dramatic manner inmates expected. There were no rows of officers placed in handcuffs. No announcement declared the institution cleansed. Anderson and Blake were placed on administrative leave, while criminal and employment investigations proceeded. Bradley was reassigned to a central administrative post, with no direct authority over inmates. The reassignment angered those who wanted immediate punishment, but investigators still needed to determine what he knew, what he intended, and which orders could be proven. Brick remained in secure housing under investigation for aggravated assault, extortion, possession of an improvised weapon through an accomplice, and participation in the broader contraband operation. He denied using the weapon himself and argued that Anderson had manipulated him. Both statements could be true without making him innocent. Jaylen was transferred to another facility and placed in a unit with greater supervision. Before leaving Northgate, he gave a recorded statement describing the extortion, laundry deliveries, threats, and locked yard attack. He asked to speak with Malik one final time. They met through a partition. Jaylen looked healthier after several nights away from Brick's reach, though exhaustion remained beneath his eyes. They said I might have to testify. You probably will. What if I get something wrong? Tell only what you remember. Do not fill the empty parts. What if they say I am helping you because you saved me? You are helping yourself by telling the truth. Jaylen looked at the table. I thought strength meant nobody could embarrass you. Malik rested his hands in front of him. Everyone can be embarrassed. You let Mason make people laugh. I let him believe the moment belonged to him. Jaylen lifted his eyes. Did it? For a while. That would have made me angry. It made me angry. You never looked angry. Control does not mean the feeling is absent. Jaylen nodded slowly. When I get out, I want to learn what you taught those kids. Balance? A faint smile appeared. The part you were not telling me. Malik returned the smile. Start with balance. After Jaylen's transfer, Fiona turned back to the case that had brought Malik to Northgate in the first place. The prison investigation strengthened her argument that recent disciplinary reports were unreliable, but it did not decide whether Malik's original conviction should stand. That question belonged to a court. The recovered business surveillance video showed the confrontation outside Malik's former training center, from an angle no jury had seen. The man, later identified as the victim, approached Malik while carrying a metal bar behind his leg. Malik stepped backward twice. The other man raised the weapon. Only then did Malik move forward. The original trial testimony had described Malik as charging without provocation. Fiona also located a former employee of the business that owned the camera. He authenticated the recording and produced an archived maintenance log showing the date and time were accurate. Another witness admitted that investigators had interviewed her but never disclosed her account to the defense. She had seen the metal bar before Malik acted. The state opposed a new trial. Its attorneys argued that the recording lacked audio and did not capture every second preceding the confrontation. They emphasized Malik's physical training, suggesting that his skill made any response more dangerous. Fiona had expected that argument. At the hearing, she did not deny Malik's background. She placed the championship record into context. A trained person is not automatically the aggressor, she told the court. The relevant question is who initiated the unlawful threat and whether the response was justified. The missing recording directly contradicts the account presented to the jury. The judge did not rule from the bench. Weeks passed. Malik remained in custody under safer conditions while the prison investigation expanded. Anderson's financial records revealed deposits inconsistent with his salary. Some were connected to relatives of inmates who received favored housing or job assignments. Blake's electronic account showed repeated edits to grievance dates and disciplinary summaries. Several medical staff members confirmed that injury descriptions had been softened after pressure from custody supervisors. The case moved beyond one locked yard. Federal investigators began reviewing whether staff had willfully used their authority to expose inmates to violence and conceal resulting injuries. State investigators prepared separate referrals involving assault, evidence tampering, false statements, contraband, and official misconduct. No charge was announced simply because the public wanted one. Evidence moved through prosecutors, warrants, interviews, and grand jury preparation. Some allegations were stronger than others. Several employees who had appeared complicit were found to have followed incomplete information rather than joined the scheme. The distinction mattered to Malik. Justice built on exaggeration would resemble the system that convicted him. Several months after the yard attack, the court granted Malik a new trial. The written order focused on the suppressed and newly authenticated evidence. It found that the missing recording could have altered the jury's assessment of who initiated the confrontation. The judge did not declare Malik innocent. The order restored the case to the stage before conviction and scheduled a separate bond hearing. Fiona visited Malik that afternoon. He read the order twice before looking up. "What does the state intend to do?" "They have not decided. So I am not leaving today." "No." She did not offer false certainty. "The bond hearing is next week. Your record before Northgate helps. The dismissed charges from the yard cannot be used as proof of misconduct, though the state may still mention the event. They will mention the championship. They already did." Malik folded the order carefully. "Then we answer it." At the bond hearing, the prosecutor argued that Malik's combat experience and the seriousness of the original incident justified continued detention. Fiona responded with a complete prison video. The judge watched Malik decline to retaliate against Brick's first attacks. He watched the weapon move toward Jaylen. He watched Malik stop when the threat ended. The footage did not make Malik harmless. It demonstrated judgment under pressure. The court granted bond under strict conditions while the state considered retrial. Malik left custody 3 days later. There was no cheering crowd at the gate. Fiona waited beside a dark sedan with a spare coat folded across the back seat. A corrections employee returned Malik's small box of property, including the legal folder that had followed him through transfers, searches, and segregation. He stepped beyond the final fence shortly after 9 a.m. For several moments, he did not move. The open space felt unfamiliar. No door buzzed. No officer counted the seconds he spent standing still. Vehicles passed along the distant road without slowing. Fiona opened the passenger door. "You are allowed to breathe out here." Malik looked back at the facility. "Jaylen is safe?" His attorney confirmed the transfer. "Keon, protective housing. His cooperation agreement is still being negotiated." "And Anderson?" "Released on bond after the initial state charges. He surrendered his passport and cannot contact witnesses." Malik absorbed that answer without visible reaction. "Blake?" "Administrative charges are pending. The criminal referral remains under review." "Bradley?" "Still under investigation." Northgate's routines changed before anyone's legal status did. Recreation pairings required secondary approval. Backup camera checks were logged at every shift change. Emergency grievances received electronic receipts that unit staff could not quietly alter. Those safeguards did not determine guilt, but they interrupted the machinery that had allowed Brick and Anderson to operate without scrutiny. Malik entered the car. 2 months later, the state dismissed the original case. The prosecutor's office stated that the passage of time, the newly authenticated recording, and changes in witness testimony made a retrial inappropriate. The statement did not apologize. It did not describe the years Malik had lost. It simply announced that the prosecution would not continue. Fiona read the notice aloud in her office. Malik listened from a chair beside the window. "That is all?" he asked when she finished. "That is the legal end of the criminal case." "It does not say they were wrong." Dismissal notices rarely speak that clearly. He looked at the city below. What happens to Northgate? The civil case continues. The state investigation continues. Federal review continues. How long? Longer than either of us wants. Malik nodded. He had learned not to confuse delay with defeat, though the difference sometimes felt small. The civil complaint named Anderson, Blake, and other officials, according to the evidence available at filing. Claims against Bradley required proof that he knew of a specific, substantial danger and deliberately failed to respond. Fiona refused to include allegations they could not yet support. The complaint described the first slap, the missing grievance, the manufactured tray incident, the planted weapon, the altered reports, and the locked recreation yard. It sought compensation, policy changes, preservation of records, and protection against retaliation for witnesses still in custody. The defendants denied liability. Anderson claimed qualified protection for discretionary acts and insisted he had made difficult decisions in a dangerous environment. Blake argued that she had performed administrative functions based on reports provided by others. Bradley maintained that no direct evidence connected him to the decision to lock the yard. The court rejected some early arguments and allowed other questions to proceed into evidence gathering. There was no immediate settlement. Brick eventually entered a plea in the state case arising from the yard attack and the extortion operation. His agreement required a truthful account of staff involvement, but the court warned that cooperation would not erase violence he had personally committed. During his statement, Brick described Malik as the only inmate who had refused both payment and retaliation. "He could have hurt me the first day," Brick admitted. "I did not know that then." The prosecutor asked when he understood. Brick looked toward the table where his attorney sat. "When he put me on the ground and still let me get back up." That answer reached Malik through Fiona, but he felt no triumph. Brick's recognition had arrived too late for the men he had injured before Malik came to Northgate. Accountability was not the same as redemption. Anderson was later indicted on state charges connected to contraband, false statements, evidence manipulation, and his role in facilitating inmate violence. He entered a plea of not guilty and remained free under conditions while the case moved forward. Blake faced both criminal review and an employment proceeding. The evidence against her was strongest where electronic records showed direct alterations. Broader claims that she knew every assault would require witness testimony and corroboration. Bradley's position remained the least certain. Investigators found language designed to suppress reporting and protect institutional statistics, but proving that he intended the specific yard attack was more difficult. He was removed from supervisory work and later resigned while the inquiry continued. Malik understood why proof had to remain stronger than anger. He had spent years inside a conviction built from an incomplete account. He would not demand that another incomplete account become justice, simply because the target deserved suspicion. Nearly a year after his release, Malik reopened a training space in a converted community building. The room was smaller than the center he had once operated. The walls needed paint. Several heavy bags had been donated. The ring ropes did not match. None of that mattered. On the first afternoon, Malik spent more time behind a folding table than inside the ring. Parents completed permission forms, while volunteers cataloged donated gloves, repaired damaged lockers, and painted over water stains. Malik learned every student's emergency contact before teaching a single movement. He showed families where the exits were, explained who would supervise each session, and promised that no closed door would separate a child from help. Rebuilding, he discovered, did not begin with punches or footwork. It began by making the room trustworthy. Jaylen called several weeks later from a re-entry program, preparing him for release. His voice sounded steadier. "I heard the center opened." "It is not a center yet." "It has walls?" "Yes." "Bags?" "Several." "Then it sounds like a center." Malik smiled. "When is your release review?" "Next spring, if nothing changes." "Things always change." "You know what I mean." "I do." Jaylen paused. "Save me a place." "I will save you work." "That too." Before ending the call, Jaylen asked the question he had carried since Northgate. "Did you ever wish you had hit Mason after the slap?" Malik looked across the training room. 2 teenagers were sorting gloves while another helped a volunteer tighten a loose ring rope. "For a few seconds, yes." "What stopped you?" "The life I wanted after those seconds." Jaylen remained quiet. Then he said, "Balance." "Exactly right." The call ended. Late that evening, Fiona arrived with a new folder. The civil case had produced internal emails from the Regional Corrections Office. One message had been sent months before Malik reached Northgate. It summarized repeated complaints about Anderson, missing grievances, unexplained injuries, and Brick's control over commissary goods. The regional administrator receiving the message had forwarded it to Bradley with a brief instruction to handle the matter internally. No outside investigation followed. Fiona placed the email on Malik's desk. "This changes the knowledge timeline." "Does it prove they knew about the yard?" "No. It may prove they knew the underlying danger existed long before you arrived." "Who else received it?" "We are still tracing the distribution." Malik read the message again. The conspiracy had not begun with his slap. His arrival had merely placed someone inside the pattern who refused to forget dates, names, and contradictions. "What happens now?" he asked. "We amend carefully. We take depositions. We verify who opened the attachment and what action followed." "No announcement?" "Not yet." Malik closed the folder. Outside the office, the training room had gone quiet. The heavy bags hung motionless beneath the overhead lights. The larger case remained open. Several Northgate inmates had already provided statements after learning that records were being preserved beyond the institution. A former nurse authenticated original medical entries. Another officer admitted that Anderson had ordered camera blind spots used for unofficial discipline. Central reviewers began examining whether similar grievance patterns existed at other facilities. The final outcome could take years. Some claims might fail. Some defendants might never face criminal conviction. Policies could change on paper without changing every person responsible for enforcing them. Yet silence had ended. That mattered because the system had depended on each man believing his injury was isolated, his missing form accidental, and his fear too small to deserve a record. Malik had connected those fragments, not by overpowering everyone around him, but by refusing to surrender his judgment. Brick's first mistake had been believing a slap defined the man who received it. Anderson's mistake had been believing an officer controlled every version of the truth. Blake's mistake had been treating procedure as a wall rather than a trail. Bradley's mistake had been assuming careful language could separate authority from consequence forever. Malik's championship past gave the story its visible reversal, but the title he once won was never the source of his greatest strength. That strength appeared in the day room, when he stayed seated. In segregation, when he rebuilt missing records from memory. In the recreation yard, when he stopped the moment the danger ended. And after release, when he accepted that justice required patience, without accepting delay as silence. Months later, a new student noticed the faded championship photograph in Malik's office. Fiona had framed it beside the court order granting him a new trial. The student pointed toward the younger man wearing the medal. "Is that you?" Malik continued sorting training gloves. It was. "You were a champion?" "For a while." "Why did you stop?" Malik looked through the office window at the taped lines on the floor. "Because winning a title and building a life are different skills." The student studied the photograph. "Could you still beat someone?" Malik handed him a pair of gloves. "That is the least important question you can ask about strength." He returned to the training floor as the afternoon group arrived. Behind him, the folder containing the regional email remained locked inside his desk, preserved for the next deposition. Ahead of him, young athletes gathered along the tape lines, waiting to learn where to place their feet. Malik stood before them. "Start with your balance," he said. And they did. Some stories end with a single verdict, a prison gate opening, or a powerful person losing a title. Malik Carter's story ended differently, because real accountability rarely arrives in one clean moment. His conviction was overturned through evidence. His freedom returned through a separate court process. The people who abused authority faced investigations at different speeds, with different outcomes, and under standards that demanded more than public anger. That unfinished reality did not weaken the victory. It made the victory honest. The man Brick Mason believed he could humiliate had once stood beneath championship lights. But the most important contest of Malik's life was not fought in an arena. It was fought each time he refused to become the violent person others needed him to be. When the locked door finally forced him to act, he showed exactly what controlled strength looked like. If Malik's journey held your attention, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing for more stories about hidden courage, hard-earned justice, and the moment truth finally reaches the people who believed they could bury it. Malik Carter's story reminds us that real strength is not measured by how quickly someone can strike back, but by how carefully they choose when action is truly necessary. He had the skill to humiliate Brick from the first day, yet he understood that revenge would only strengthen the false story others were preparing against him. His restraint was not weakness, It was discipline, patience, and respect for the future he was still fighting to reclaim. When another man's life was placed in danger, Malik acted without cruelty and stopped the moment the threat ended. That difference matters. Power without control creates fear, but power guided by judgment can protect lives and expose injustice. His journey also shows why records, witnesses, and persistence are important when institutions attempt to hide the truth. Justice may arrive slowly, and it may not punish everyone at the same time, but silence gives wrongdoing room to grow. Courage begins when someone decides that fear will not control what they remember, report, or defend. If this story inspired you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that patience, courage, and truth can outlast abuse of power.